This is an important story, folks, that kind of got lost in a very chaotic and very eventful news week. Russia is making daily tactical gains in eastern Ukraine as concerns swirl around Ukrainian military reporting. This from CNN. Vladimir Putin's forces have made further gains in at least 3 locations along the eastern front in Ukraine, including for the first time in several months an advance in the northern Kharkiv region, highlighting again Kyiv's need for ammunition and weapons from the United States and other allies. Russia's tactical advances are now daily and reflect the new tempo on the battlefield since the fall of the industrial town of Avdiivka in February. The gains are generally modest, from a few hundred meters of territory to perhaps a kilometer at most, but they are usually taking place in several locations at once. Meanwhile, Ukraine's losses are being accompanied by criticism from influential military bloggers and analysts of the armed forces' official battlefield updates. One of Russia's main efforts is in the Donetsk region. Ukraine's Deep State Monitoring Group, which updates daily changes in frontline positions, shows Russian forces pushing forward in 8 different locations along 20 to 25 kilometers, frontline in one 24-hour period. Military bloggers on both sides have reported that Russian forces have crossed a watercourse and taken control of the settlements of Semenivka and Berdichi, which Ukrainian Army Chief Oleksandr Syrsky confirmed in a post on Telegram on Sunday. Russia had deployed up to 4 brigades in offensive operations in the area, Syrsky said. A few kilometers to the north, Solovyov, hope I said that right, is now also reported to be in Russian hands, and the tiny settlement of Karamik at least partially so as well. Later on in the article, a Ukrainian army spokesman described Russian forces there as having become significantly more active over the past day, while Deep State assessed a Russian advance of between 1 and 2 kilometers into the village of Kislivka. Overall, the front lines in this region have been among the most stable since Ukraine captured a large swath of territory in Kharkiv region in the late summer of 2022. Many Western analysts, along with Ukrainian officials, see Russia's current stepped-up tempo as a precursor to a major offensive attempt later this spring. It is also assumed Moscow wants to take advantage of its significant advantage in ammunition before U.S. Supplies, greenlit last week after 6 months of political stasis, get to the front lines. The Institute for the Study of War assesses that there will be more short-term setbacks for Ukraine, though without major strategic defeats. Russian forces will likely make significant tactical gains in the coming weeks as Ukraine waits for U.S. security assistance to arrive at the front, but remain unlikely to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses, it wrote. Ukraine's other major quantitative weakness, which also helps explain recent battlefield trajectories, is manpower. Oh, 2 expert military analyst Jews, Keaton Weiss and Russell Dobular, made this prediction a long time ago. A new mobilization law comes into effect next month, which is expected to improve conscription processes. But Kyiv has proved highly reluctant to say how many more soldiers it needs, while Moscow keeps increasing numbers. The quality of Russian fighters, of course, varies, but the quantitative advantage is a serious problem, Rob Lee of Foreign Policy Research Institute posted on X. Without its manpower advantage, Russia's artillery and air power advantage would not be sufficient for Russia to make gains on the battlefield. The relative manpower situation is likely the most important factor that will determine the war's trajectory, particularly if Russia can sustain recruiting 20 to 30,000 a month, Lee adds. What did we say? They have people that they will throw at this war. And
they have always fought this way.
Yes.
They have always fought this way. This is the story of the Russian military. In the end, they will not quit when they feel it's existential to their existence, which they do. Any analyst, if you're a Russia expert, could have told you, and many did, if you make the Russians feel threatened sufficiently by encroaching further and further towards a border that they have been brutally invaded over throughout their history, you're going to provoke a military response. They see it as existential that NATO not be on their border for good reason.
Yes, and they have triple the manpower of Ukraine. Triple. Right. Some people think that's a surprisingly low amount. Don't forget, a lot of Russia, it's a big land. A lot of it has no people in it. A lot of it's frozen over, right? But still, triple the manpower. And Ukraine has a draft going on, which we'll get to in a moment, because here we go.
You're talking about a country that has come back and won against superior forces that had invaded deep into its territory.
Yes. Yeah.
You thought they weren't going to win this, that this tiny country with a fraction of the population was going to win this war. Now, as you have warned and pointed out, the West is going so fucking crazy. Who knows, man? Maybe we do commit Western forces before we're willing to lose to Russia. But certainly Ukraine simply does not have enough humans over time to win a war of attrition against Russia. Anyone could have told you that. Many did.
Indeed. And here they are. Kiev issues restrictions on passports for military age men. So these are some of the desperate measures that Ukraine is forced to resort to as this new aid shipment comes in. What did Russell say from the beginning? They're going to need people to use these weapons. Weapons alone can't fight a war. You need men. The Ukrainian government further tightening regulations as it seeks to address a shortage of troops, approved rules temporarily barring military-age men from applying for passports abroad. The provisions and a subsequent clarification from Ukraine's foreign ministry were announced on Wednesday, a day after Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba suspended consular services for males aged 18 to 60, not 18 to 34, the prime-time millennial or Gen Z demo. No, 18 to 60 until May 18th. He criticized those abroad for failing to serve in the 26-month-old war against Russia. The foreign ministry said applicants seeking a special certificate declaring they wish to return to Ukraine would be able to get help at embassies and consulates. Regular services, it said, would resume on May 18th, and applications received after April 23rd would be handled then. That is when a new law on mobilization is to come into effect that aims to increase troop numbers through incentives to volunteers and punishments for draft dodgers. So the amount of people who are actually going to end up on the front lines as a result of this is very, very low. But this is how desperate the situation has become. To explain this in a little more detail, this is a report from Al Jazeera.
Find men to fight. Its military struggling to find men to fight. Its military commander in the east has said that in some sections of the front line, Russian forces outnumber it 7-1. Now its government's announced a new controversial measure. It'll stop issuing any new passports abroad to military-aged men. They'll only be able to get them back in Ukraine. It wants them to come home.
This is what the Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmytro Kuleba, wrote in a statement. How it looks like now, a man of conscription age went abroad, showed his state that he doesn't care about its survival, and then comes and wants to receive services from this state. It doesn't work this way. Our country's at war.
On Wednesday, the order seemed to go into instant effect in the Ukrainian passport office in Warsaw. There are tens of thousands of Ukrainian men of military age in Poland.
I got told to pick up my passport. I got here at 6 a.m. yesterday. We spent the night, but no one's giving us a passport. What do we do now?
This is a fight against draft dodgers, but they didn't ask us on what basis we went abroad. How can I be a draft dodger if I went abroad legally?
Poland, neighbouring Ukraine, supports the measure, and its defence minister said late Wednesday that his country could help out.
We've already suggested for a long time that we're able to aid the Ukrainian side by helping those who are subject to military service go home. I think that many of our compatriots feel outraged now when they see young Ukrainian men in hotels and cafes and hear all the time about how much effort we have to make to help Ukraine.
But will the measure increase Ukraine's troop numbers? Oleksiy Hetman is a military analyst and reserve major in the army.
We need three things. One is the military aid that we've already got from our partners. Two is the mobilization of troops. And three, powerful fortifications to repel the Russians. These three things need to add up so that we're able to fight back.
With weapons from a $61 billion aid package from the United States now set to begin arriving in coming weeks, Ukraine's still missing men to wield them. John Holman, Al Jazeera, Kyiv, Ukraine.
So that's their report. Now, on top of this, here we go. Ukraine Parliament overhauls army draft rules to boost troop strength. So this was mentioned in the previous article. Ukraine's parliament passed a bill on Thursday, this is a couple weeks ago, to overhaul how the armed forces draft civilians into the ranks after a general told the chamber that Russian forces outnumbered Kyiv's troops up to 10 times on the battlefield in the east. 2 years into a war against Russia, a country with 3 times its population, Ukraine has been suffering setbacks on the battlefield. Tens of thousands of soldiers killed, many times more have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have now fought for 2 years with no respite. Wow. Martial law lets draft officers call up men over 27 to fight, and a separate measure signed into law last week by President Volodymyr Zelensky made thousands more men susceptible by lowering that minimum age to 25. Yeah, the Churchill of his time. Really, that's what this guy is going to be known as. Really, they told him that. That's what they told him. That's how they got him to go along with this. But during the war, there have been thousands of cases of draft dodging, and in practice, commanders have said they are not receiving enough troops. The new measure should increase troop numbers by requiring men to update their draft data with the authorities, boosting payments to those who volunteer, and letting some convicts serve. They
were doing that from the beginning. Gray Zone reported on how they were bringing in people convicted of rape, murder, fans of the playground, like just fucking monsters, and throwing them on the front lines.
Yeah, that's right. They did come out with a piece on that very early on. It adds some new punishments for draft dodging, but stopped short of severe measures that had prompted public opposition. So what does that tell you? Tells you maybe the Ukrainian people are getting a little tired of dying, and their fathers and their husbands and their sons dying. Pass this law and the Ukrainian armed forces will not let down you or the Ukrainian people, General Yuri Sodol, commander of the joint forces, told lawmakers. We are maintaining our defenses with our last strength, he said, as lawmakers stood up and applauded more than a dozen commanders who attended the session. So, first of all of the Democrats and most of the Republicans, no, not most of them, I'm sorry, about half of the GOP, who are so proud to have gotten this aid out there. This is what the war actually looks like. It looks like supporting a country that is so desperate for fighters who do not want to fight that they're changing the passport rules, they're lowering the age requirements, they're padding the envelopes for people who volunteer, they're letting convicts serve, I guess in greater numbers than before, because, Russell, you're right, it was reported way early on that they were letting a lot of violent criminals serve. This is what you're actually egging on, is the destruction of a people. That's what this is. Now, as for Zelensky and this team, his upper crust, right? General Yuri Sodol, whoever the fuck he is, this team of Ukrainian generals, the top brass, Seymour Hersh came out with a piece that these guys were all living high on the hog, driving luxury cars, skimming a lot of the money off the top of the aid and living
We're
like
supporting
kings.
Their entire economy.
Yeah.
We're paying their pensions. We're paying their health care. Things that Americans could only dream of having. Exactly. We are financing in Ukraine.
Yeah, well, yes, that's true, and that's at the population level. I'm talking about like this upper crust.
And just before we go on, I decided not to use it, but because it was from summer 2023, and I can't say what the circumstance is now. But CBS News did a story. I watched the whole piece. It's legit, about how there were more nightclubs and clubs in Kiev as of summer of 2023 than there had been before the war. So that's where your money's going, folks.
Well, these people, this leadership group in Ukraine, right? Whether you want to call it, Zelensky's cabinet or these generals, right? The people executing this at the highest levels, they're living pretty well, apparently, which would explain why they keep wanting this money to come in, because they are either the most gullible and just tragically and laughably inept leaders of the 21st century by a mile, that they would be led to think that they're actually going to win this war on their own with NATO money and NATO weapons, yes, but not NATO troops.
But with their blood,
Right. Or they are on the take and letting this happen. They are some of the biggest criminals of the 21st century, because they are literally running their people through a meat grinder for no reason other than the fact that, according to Seymour Hersh, they are skimming off the top of this aid and staying rich.
They're driving luxury cars around Kiev, according to Seymour Hersh.
Yeah.
Well, it was known when they were still willing to talk about this as the most corrupt country in Europe before the war. So what do you think is going to happen? You got the most corrupt country in Europe and you dump billions of dollars? Of course they're going to steal the money. Of course, that's a given.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I heard, I was listening to, I believe it was Jeffrey Sachs on one of the shows recently, and he said, part of Biden's legacy, because there's been a lot of attention paid to the destruction in Gaza now, obviously, but a huge part of his legacy is going to be the destruction of Ukraine, like the destruction of this country.
Sure.
How he just led this country to ruin, and he convinced this comedian to go along with it. Right. Best case, he lied. He tricked him into thinking he could win a war he couldn't win, and juiced his ego to the point where Zelensky bought it. Worst case, Zelensky knew he never had a shot, but knew he can send his wife shopping in Paris, right? There was that story broke. She was out buying luxury clothes. Either they sold their people out, or they fell for one of the most obvious scams ever perpetrated, which was the idea that, no, Ukraine is going to beat Russia in a one-on-one war.
Right.
And now they are hard up for men, to the point where they are resorting to measures that are not going to increase their numbers by any significant amount.
I suspect Zelensky believed it at the beginning.
I think he did too.
And by now, he's got to know better.
Please clap.